Hey, what's up, Tribe Youth? Happy Sunday. I'm glad that you are here with us this morning, and we are recapping just real quick for you what we talked about this past Wednesday. If you didn't make it this past Wednesday, no worries. This video will catch you up to speed what we talked about, so that way when we jump into groups in just a few minutes, you can be in on it and be part of some of the discussions and process what we're up to this morning. But if you were here this past week, we gave you a couple challenges, some things to think through, and I would love for you to bring that to the table today when we're in our small groups, because this will help us go deeper, which is the whole goal of our small group time together, is to take what we're talking about a little bit further and apply it to our lives. And so here's what's up. We talked last week, part one, and this past Wednesday, part two of this series, Squad Up, where we're talking all about being part of God's family and doing for others what God has done for us. In a couple weeks, we're talking about what it looks like to grow together and how we can unify and stand strong together, which I'm really excited for. But today, here's what we are recapping and diving into. You see, our big idea was that in God's family, we can tear down walls and build tables because we get to do for others what God has done for us. And my first question for you this morning is, what has God done for you? What is He doing in your life right now? What has He done? But then maybe what are you working out right now that He's promising to do? You see, this matters in relationship with other people, because we bring that to the table of our relationship. And I started off on Wednesday talking about feuds, some of the clashes that happen in our lives and in our relationships with other people. We like the feuds, like feud between Popeyes or Chick-fil-A, or LeBron James and Steph Curry, or Hamilton versus Burr, if you watched the movie Hamilton at all. But what happens when those feuds bleed into our real relationships? Like I had a blow up with my mom a number of years ago, and it was one of the most difficult feuds I had. But there was hope, but it wasn't easy. Maybe you have one of those in your life. What does a feud in your life look like? Because looking back, and maybe you can do this now if you've ever had one, looking back, your fight seems less of a big deal now than it did then. But at the time, it just felt like there was just a wall of division being built between you, and there was no way that you were going to tear down that wall or climb the wall even to make sure you reconciled. And so what feud have you had, or maybe what feud are you in right now? Bring that to the table today. Because we're talking about this idea of building walls. Essentially, a feud, when two people go at it, it creates a wall of separation. Why? Because usually a feud begins with a lack of understanding, or hurt feelings, or prejudices, or jealousy, maybe even a possessiveness or lack of support. You have opposite goals and values, and people feel unsupported, and maybe you are outgrowing one another, and instead you've compromised. And all these things create bricks in our wall, and they get bigger and bigger until we realize it's too tall. And so what do you do when you have some of these things in your life? Do you deal with them? Because if you don't, they can deal a result where your relationship is so broken that it seems impossible to put back together. And that's tough. But if you do, then you can resolve the tension and bring reconciliation back into your relationship. We were in Ephesians 2 on Wednesday, and we know that Paul was writing to this church, God's chosen people. But he writes something so significant that I think I want you to hear again. In chapter 2, verse 13, he says, "But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far off have been brought near by the blood of Christ," meaning because of what Jesus did on the cross. Verse 14 says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility." You see, even Paul knew in biblical times that there were walls of hostility in relationships with one another. And there was actually the physical wall between Jews and Gentiles, but there's also the wall between us and God. And this wall wasn't built by disagreements or misunderstandings. This one was built by sin and the presence of sin in our lives. But Paul says that through Jesus, only through Jesus, that both walls can be knocked down. Why? Because in God's family, we get to tear down walls and build tables, and we get to do for others what God has done for us. You see, we also picked up in Ephesians 1 through 10 as a second section. And I want to read another verse, verse 5. It says this: "Even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ, by grace you have been saved." You know, we hear this, Jesus saves all the time. But what does that really mean? What does saving mean? Well, simply that Jesus has rescued us from a life in eternity without God. And so we get to talk about that this morning. What has God saved you from? Maybe what is your story? What makes you who you are? And why has God so stepped into your world and changed your world? You know, that matters when you're part of God's family, because that means that God tore down walls in your life and he's built tables for relationship to happen. Jesus tore down walls, but he also created something new. He turned those walls into tables. Walls keep us separated, but tables allow us to see eye to eye, to have conversations, to share meals, to invite others to come and join us. Reconciliation makes it possible for us to be together. And through Jesus, we can also have peace with God and with each other. We get to do for others what God has done for us. We get to tear down walls and build tables. I shared the story of me and my mom, and ultimately, I had to allow God to work in me to tear down my wall so that I could build a table of connection, build a table of relationship to understand what was going on. And it was only then that I was able to see freedom in my life. Maybe it's the same for you. We ended up our time together with this thought of, what wall do you need to tear down between you and God? Are you angry at God? Are you struggling with God? Are you frustrated with God? Do you have questions about God? Well, let's talk about that today. Maybe you have a wall between you and somebody else. Who? Why? What created that wall, and where did it come from? Because maybe there's somebody in your life that you need to make the first move to tearing down that wall and building a table of relationship. Maybe you need to ask for forgiveness. Humble yourself and ask for forgiveness, and maybe give forgiveness. Be the bigger person. Because if we want to act like God's family, we're going to need to tear down some walls, build some tables, and do the hard work. It's hard work of doing for others what God has done for us. Thanks to Jesus, we can. So let's dive in. I'm excited for this morning.